My name is Briggs. I'm with the World Wildlife Fund Chihuahua and Desert Program, and also with the Research Ranch, on the Research Ranch Board. And it's a pleasure to be here. It's been like 15 years since I've been here. It's great to come back. And many thanks to Gina and Linda. That's cool. So I come from the perspective of Big Bend, Rio Grande, and so it's a place-based area. We're just beginning to deal with climate change, just like on the Sonoita Plains, and so it's a different ecoregion, freshwater ecosystem, so in that case, different from the Sonoita Plains. However, I think a lot of the same issues and hurdles and challenges that we're dealing with could apply here. So hopefully my presentation will be a little bit of a few nuggets in here you can take away, and continued exchange would be great. But I wanted to put this up first and just kind of go through where I'm coming from. I'm coming from the Big Bend, different ecoregion. Definitely from the Big Bend team, which I'll get into in a little bit. It's a strong binational team, definitely a feeling just like you all. Climate change is here, has been, is upon us, and we feel rather ill-prepared to deal with many of its consequences. Beginning in 2009, we got a grant with NOAA and started beginning to put our heads together and figure out just how we might grapple with climate change, particularly with from the perspective of looking at conservation activities along the Rio Grande and Big Bend. Uncertainty, just as Holly mentioned, will always be a part of the process, and it's just a matter of kind of how we deal with it. And of course, I'll get back into that in a second. Looking for ways to winnow that uncertainty down, I think, is going to be the key for all of us to be able to take manageable chunks and be able to deal with them. The last two, stop the bleeding, please. In other words, focus on stressors that we already know are affecting our landscape is going to continue, and probably more so, I think, be a really important key to the future. And the whole idea of adaptive strategies I'll get into in a little bit. The idea of putting together strategies that we feel are going to be successful and effective no matter which climate change scenario becomes the future reality. So setting the stage, just to give you a quick background on WWF and where we are in Big Bend. We work in a bunch of different countries. In the U.S., we have Southeastern Rivers and Streams and the Chihuahua Desert Program, as well as programs in Alaska. Several different programs in Mexico for good reason, owing to diversity, what have you, high-density. And the Chihuahua program became one of the focus of World Wildlife Fund because of its diversity. It's the third most diverse desert in the world, largest in North America. A couple nice little factoids there. Harbors more mammal species than Yellowstone. More reptile species than Sonoita Desert for competition's sake. Some nice pretty pictures here. Anybody been to the Chihuahuan Desert? I bet all of you have. Yes. All right.
We're in it.
Hey, you're kind of in it. We work a lot in Mexico and with the Tejada Humade in Sierra Madre. It's a rather diverse program. So one of the focus of our program in the Chihuahuan Desert is the Rio Grande. Just to kind of paint the picture, Rio Grande drains in the U.S., the Southern Rockies, comes down here through Big Bend, and then empties out the Gulf of Mexico. Two of the largest tributaries are the Pecos and the Conchos. We have two offices, well, two and a half. I'm in Tucson, and that's sort of the half office, and we have an office in El Paso and an office in Chihuahua City. So, one of the reasons for focusing on the Big Bend reach of the Rio Grande is the high density of protected areas that are in this region. There's several in Mexico, protected natural areas, Ocampo, Modesto Canyon, and Modesto Carmen. There's Big Bend National Park. It's bracketed by 2 state parks. There's the Wild and Scenic River here. Here's the Rio Grande coming through. And Mexico is about to name a sister Wild and Scenic called El Monumento on their side. So a variety of different protected areas. It's about 5,000 square miles. So one of the things point I wanted to make in terms of climate change is that it is really critical, at least from our perspective, to get a handle on what the system is doing, where it's been, and why it's changed. And in this sense, maybe it's putting climate change and all of its ramifications aside for the moment. But this is the kind of thing that we've been working on over the past 5 years or so. So we want to know, at least in terms of the Rio Grande, what its current condition is, and maybe that could be the parameters, the typical ones for the river: stream flow, sediment budget, morphology, distribution extent of riparian species, aquatic species, etc. How have these conditions changed? Is the system currently in some kind of dynamic equilibrium, or is it still rapidly changing? And what are the main stressors behind these changes? So getting a handle on this stuff is absolutely essential when we start putting climate change into the equation. So just to give you a flavor of what we're dealing with in Big Bend and along the Rio Grande Reach in Big Bend. So what's the problem with the river? It's impounded, it's over allocated. To give you a quick sense of just what the river is like, similar in many respects to the Colorado. There were no major dams prior to 1916. There's 6 major ones today, and at least 5 minor ones. 2 million people in the sort of greater Las Cruces, El Paso, Juarez area. 6 million projected by 2025. 35,000 acres pre-impoundment, which meant before 1916, of irrigated land, 700,000. Significant channelization for flood control. So this river has been affected quite a bit. And you can kind of put this cartoon up for any major arid land river system that is impounded. There's usually a lot of water on the upper parts of the watershed. 3 major water uses, with agriculture and urban community being the 2, and then evaporation from reservoirs being the second major one. So by the time the river gets to Big Bend, we're looking at just a trickle of water. That's sort of the take-home point from that. So, bear with me here. I'm a hydrologist, so I gotta give you a little bit of numbers, just some background, so don't come down from your sugar buzz quite yet. But it's this is kind of critical to understanding just where the river came from and what we think we might be able to do in terms of restoration and how climate change might affect those goals. So this was put together by Jack Schmidt and one of his students, David Dean at Utah State University. This is pre-impoundment before 1950, before any major dams are in the river, and 1932, 1940, and this is pretty much present day. And so just take a quick look in the thickness of lines. This is average annual flow at various gauges along the river. So you can see a couple things. We just compare this one to this one. Is that, for one, flow in Big Bend is greatly diminished. It's now 12.8 compared to 72.1, as well as flow from the Conchos, and maybe more importantly, almost no flow from the U.S. side. So this is the Conchos coming up here, and this is the U.S. part of the river coming down here, meeting at a town called Presidio. And so the take-home point here is, one, greatly diminished stream flow, a lot of sedimentation still, not enough stream flow to move that sediment through the system, nothing coming from the U.S., hydrology in Big Bend being driven by Rio Conchos, so flow from Mexico. So we have all these changes happening, and yet when we get into here's Big Bend again. Here's the conchos coming in here. Here's Presidio, Hinaga, and there's the river which forms the border. And so when the river comes down here, we have all this reduced flow. We still have all these tributaries coming into the river here, and they're putting in sediment. So we have all the sediment coming into the system, and yet no flow to push it out. And on top of this, literally, is we have a couple invasive species that we're dealing with. Tamarisk being one, which is taking over a lot of near channel bars, and flowers like about 9 months out of the year. And another invasive plant called Carizo or Arundo. And so these plants, if you look at a sort of a typical setting through the river, through Big Bend, you got the river here, Mexico on this side, US on here, and this is pretty typical where you have salt cedar and Arundo, not necessarily in that order depending on where you are. And so you see like here, right, you have Arundo in the foreground and salt cedar peeking up behind you. This is pretty typical how the river looks through much of Big Bend. And so this is what's been happening to the river. If you look at, and this was compiled by David Dean at Utah State. So we look at before, around the 1940s and before, the river through Big Bend had a morphology that looks like this. And with reduced stream flow and all the sediment coming in, it started to narrow. And so during the 40s and 70s, you just get this narrowing. And the reason why that's important is with all this channel narrowing comes greatly reduced habitat quality for wildlife, less channel capacity, which means more flooding for riverside towns. And so the more it narrowed, the worse it became for people who live by the river, as well as for wildlife that were trying to make a home in it. And then occasionally you get these resets, these flows that come in and blast the channel out, and then it would continue to narrow again. And so here's just a few or a few photos of some of the changes that at the river. This is at El Tornillo Creek, and you can see the river here on this side, tributary Tornillo coming in over here, and this is in 36, and this is what it looks like today. Take a look at the width of the river over on the left-hand side.
Just get back.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And
what caused it to thin like that?
well, the combination of all that biomass all that green stuff that you see there, is the Arundo and salt cedar. And so that anchors the sediment that the river has in it, and
So it's preventing the erosion.
exactly right.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right. And the same here at the mouth of Boquillas. This is in 55, and this is 2002. So there's just sort of a summary, again, just sort of painting a picture of what the river is like today and why. And sort of the ramifications of all these changes along the river and how they might be affecting, and why we're involved, what we want to do. Is decrease habitat for the most part, and increase flooding of riverside towns.
Mark, before those two species came in, what was the predominant vegetation?
It was small patches, very small, of cottonwoods and willows, a few other native species, but you didn't have a lot of biomass, almost none, because the river would just essentially in the spring blow it out.
It was mostly wide and sandy, right? Unstable channel in the traditional sense.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so the other part that as we began to grapple with climate change that we felt was really critical is taking what we learned from doing this past evaluation of the river and developing a vision. And combining that with sort of the socio-political elements that were involved, the partners that we had, the money available, et cetera. And I think this is one of the most critical steps, I think, potentially, in dealing with climate change, because it provides you a really realistic, potentially realistic anchor as to what you feel, meaning the team that's involved and the other players that are involved in this river restoration attempt, and what you want the river to be like a few decades or so down the road. Of course, it takes time. It's really difficult, and it involves this sort of mixture or blending of science, social politics, community involvement, and it's not a straightforward process. But once you get there, I think it really provides you a leg up on getting towards that goal that you upheld. And it allows you opportunities for, once you have that goal set, it allows you opportunities for identifying these thresholds, these tipping points that are really critical for understanding how well you're able to get to that goal, the progress that you're making, the types of challenge that you have, et cetera. So just a couple things on this. This is the Big Bend team that has been put in place, and this is, we have about 25 members or so. And then from the work that we've done with climate change and our grant with NOAA, we've added to a list of, one of the great benefits has been this great list of folks who have been involved from the climate change aspects. So climatologists from Texas and climates. Mexico was greatly involved. Want to recognize also Skyline Alliance, which has done several great workshops of late that we've been involved in. So a really interesting team, and it was this team that came together to form this vision. And so what we're essentially asking ourselves here is, what is the desired state that we want for the river? And so this same question, of course, can be applied to the Sonoita Plains, can be applied to any sort of place-based situation. For the Rio Grande, the condition is probably like here. For the Sonoita Plains, it might be more over here. But the question is kind of the same. What we're asking ourselves is, given the current condition of the river, do we want to just leave it alone? Do we want to let it just continue to a degraded state? Or do we want to go to a more wild state? Are we able to get it toward like some kind of restoration state? Or are we going to do some sort of mitigation and only get us to this far? So it's these kind of questions, and if we're able to, no matter where we end up, if we're able to put that objective out there, it's a real bonus and help to formulating plans in the context of climate change. So what the idea is that we would like to do is, you want to get to the point with especially the science of being able to say to the powers that be, whoever they are, whether they're a superintendent, whether they're politicians, what have you, is where are we? Are we here? Is the Rio Grande here, or is the Sonoita Plains here, where the cost of implementation or the political cost of doing conservation is so expensive, it only gets you a little bit of bump in terms of the improvement that you get? Or are you on this kind of curve here, where small amounts of input is going to get you huge amounts of bump, or somewhere in between? If you're here on this curve, if that's where we are with the Rio Grande, it might be wise to pack up our marbles and go elsewhere. If we're somewhere over there, it might be good to stay in the game. So what we did was, that team that I put up there, we came together. It shows my PowerPoint inadequacies. We came together in 2008, and it was a great meeting because all those people that I showed in that previous slide were there. And essentially we asked this question is, given what we know about the river, and all the sediment, and lack of water, et cetera, what is it do we think we want the river to look like 2 decades from now? And we kind of pulled that number out of the hat. But what we're talking about is a short-term future. And we came up with a couple fairly detailed objectives, and there's a whole other list here that I'm not going to um, put in front of you. But the first two I thought were important. There's a lot of biological objectives that we put forward. But we focused a lot on the physical. We focused how we wanted to see the channel. And so these two objectives in particular we felt were crucial, and we're in the process now of actually quantifying. When we say we want a wide and shallow, unstable channel, what is it? What is the width, depth, all this stuff that you can use to actually quantify that objective along particular parts of the river is where we're at now, so we can gauge how well our progress is in the future. And so over the past several years, in order to accomplish that vision, several different activities have been put in place to try to accomplish science, environmental flow, on-the-ground efforts, and the strengthening of this binational group. We call it the BBBCC because someone thought it might be easy to say. But it stands for Big Bend Binational Conservation Cooperative, and now we're frantically searching for another name. So the theory is just to give you an example of what I mean by this objective stuff when it comes to climate change, is that we think that reset floods happen naturally. When this channel narrowing happens, these floods that come through here, they happen once every 12 years. That's what the data show. We think, and this stuff here, this channel condition here is better than here for a variety of different reasons. We think that's a combination of environmental flow and on-the-ground activities can put into effect to actually help us maintain these conditions. And so that's kind of our working theory in sort of my take-home point of this long, drawn-out introduction. So reset flows occur, morphologic conditions are better in that sea area. Removing dense stands of vegetation could be useful to make the underlying alluvium more vulnerable to evacuation. And environmental flow can help us to evacuate that sediment. The environmental flow is going to have to come out of Mexico, so involve the U.S.-Mexico Treaty, which, as daunting as that is not as hard as getting it out of different states in the U.S. So when it comes to climate change, this is the question that we're asking for. Now that we've spent this time in trying to understand the system, what we're asking ourselves is what impacts of climate change could make those objectives that we put forward and spent the last 5 years developing, could make them unattainable. So I got like 3 minutes left before I get the hook here. So, and this is kind of take home, so let me run through this quick, but after going through this process with NOAA, this is kind of the stuff that we're thinking about that we think really makes sense in the context of climate change, in the context of what we're doing in Big Bend to reach our objectives in the context of climate change. So we're trying, of course, it's a very complicated system. It has binational river, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And on top of that, we're putting climate change. And so one of the things that we did was to do an assessment of all the weather stations in the northern Chihuahuan Desert to give us a good handle on what the climate has been in the desert in the past, how it has changed, and what the prognosis might be for the future based only on those records in the ecoregion that we're working on. And I'm going to spare you the results, but just like here's sort of the bottom line, temperatures in Big Bend are expected to increase 3 to 5 degrees. Even cool years during the middle of the 21st century will be normal or above normal relative to current temperatures. Evaporation rates, of course, will increase. And with greater human population area, there'll be even greater demand on water. Future summertime temperatures will be consistently warmer. The eye-opening thing here for Big Bend is that we get all our precip in the summer. And so if we're relying more on winter precip and the summer is going to be hotter, this could be a real problem for the Big Bend region. Droughts, high variability in precip, et cetera, will give us a lot of droughts. We expect them to be hotter, more intense.